everybody. Welcome to our third workshop. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to get started on this workshop. I think you all are going to enjoy our guest speaker this evening. I think gonna learn a lot. Our topic of our workshop this evening is on the topic of how do I prepare for a professional interview. So you're going into the interview, maybe you've gone to career fairs, maybe your mentors hooked you up and connected you with someone at their company. Maybe you've gotten some referrals somewhere else. Doesn't really matter. You are about to step into the interview. Maybe you've already had interviews before. This workshop is about how to think about interviews differently. We are bringing in guest speakers who are experts on this topic from around the world to give you insight and wisdom on how to make the most out of the professional interview. So this workshop is going to be about 45 minutes long with, and I encourage you to ask questions throughout the workshop. I'm going to ask you 3 questions during the workshop, which I'll have you answer. That's how you get credit for being here. You're now midway through the program so far. You should have already had your first conversation with your mentor. Hopefully you've already started setting up your second conversation with your mentor. If you have not, or you're struggling to get in touch with your mentor, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We need to take care of you so then you can get connected and make the most out of this program. So really, this program is all about how can you prepare for the first professional interview. Really, what you're selling your interviewer on is your ability, essentially your future potential opportunity. Essentially, you are selling them on your potential, because at the end of the day, people are not expecting you to come in and be the expert on XYZ topic. They are expecting you to be a willing learner and someone that's eager to gain knowledge and to be a better professional. If you can convey that, you will get the opportunity. But it will be competitive, especially in highly competitive industries. And I know that anybody that's in this program is more likely than not going into a career that's competitive. I mean, you would not have gotten a mentor had you not wanted to take your level, take your career, take your life to the next level. So with that said, I want to encourage you to keep your head up, keep applying, put yourself out there for more opportunities, and leverage the insight and knowledge that you're getting in these workshops to make yourself and to help you better prepare yourself for the interview. Now, before we get started into our main program, I want to ask you a quick question, and that question is, when it comes to the interview, how do you want people to feel about you? In other words, what feeling are you trying to convey about yourself when you are in an interview? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that, because I think if we are more intentional about how we want other people to feel about us in the interview, our likelihood of actually having that happen increases substantially. I mean, I've talked about in past workshops, strategy, story, state, which I will talk about in a moment, but this is a really big part of the story part. Like, what is the story that you're telling yourself? Now, I think sometimes we can interpret that as psyching ourselves up, getting ourselves confident, getting ourselves pumped for why we're going to be successful. And I think that's great. But I think if we could take it to another level, that being intentional about how we want other people to perceive us. So if we want them to perceive us as confident, or if we want them to perceive us as knowledgeable, or if we want them to perceive us as eager to learn and having potential, it could be a variety of things. But what I really want you to do is I really want you to identify feelings that you want other people to feel about you when you enter their world. Because you can be intentional about that. Your likelihood of having them actually feel that is much greater. But if you don't set the intention, you have no idea how they're going to feel about you. You've got really no control over it. But if you intentionally think to yourself, I want people to think of me as confident. Okay, what am I going to do that's going to convey convey confidence? Really, it's all about whatever that feeling you want to convey. Make sure that you are taking actions and being intentional about ensuring that other people view you that way, and that you come in trying to actively think about actions that you can take that will help other people perceive you in that light. So let's start under the next part of our workshop. Now, I've talked about this in the past before, and I've talked about this in previous workshops, but one of the big things that I always love to stress is the 3 keys to success in the program. There are 3 of them. That is your strategy, that is your story, that is your state. I bring it up every single time because it is that important. And the reason why it's important is because if we are not honing our strategy, honing our story, honing our state, we are not setting ourselves up for successful. If we let someone else drive our roadmap for us, we could end up in a location that we do not want to be. But if we are intentional about our story, if we're intentional about our strategy, if we're intentional about our state, we are much more likely to get to where we would like to go. It's kind of like the law of attraction. When we put it out there, and we put it out to more people, and we're more intentional about what we want to accomplish, and we're more intentional about how we are going to convey our bodies and ourselves to other people, the likelihood that it comes back to us is much greater. So I want to talk about state. State is the most important thing. Like physically, where are you at in your life, in your world? What is going on? I don't care how stressed you are. I don't care how mad you are. I don't care how dejected you are. I don't care of anything negative going on in your world. If you can get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, especially for the interview, you will be successful. I'm a big proponent of power poses. I'm a big proponent of screaming at the top of your lungs and dancing out. In fact, I'd like to do that with you right now. So for the next 30 seconds, what I like you to do is I like you to stand up. I like you to shimmy it out. I like you to shake it out. I like you to scream at the top of your lungs. Just scream at the top of your lungs at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out, let it loose, let it go, because you've got nothing to lose. I don't care if it's a popularity contest. I don't care if you're in a library. I don't care if you're in a house. What do you have to lose? This is not a coolness effort here. It's about making an impact and preparing yourself physically for being successful. What is the price of success? Getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. Maybe looking a little weird to some of your colleagues, coworkers, or peers, but what is that cost to you in the long run? Nothing. They're going to say, you know, hey, what were you doing? Why were you dancing? Why were you screaming at the top of your lungs? You say, hey, I'm getting myself in a state conducive for being successful. Maybe they've never heard about it before. Maybe they've never learned. You can educate them on this. So don't worry about how other people are perceiving you when you are going to get yourself into a state that's going to level up your game, especially when it comes to the interview. Now, you may not want to do this in the office of a business that you are about to interview in, but you could certainly do it in the bathroom, in a bathroom stall. Get yourself into a 2-minute power pose. Stand up like Superman or Superwoman, or put your arms out like as if you're a star. There's a lot of things that you can do to get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, but you should be doing something, because if you're not, you are letting the way that other people perceive you essentially come up to chance. And you don't want to chance it, especially for the opportunity of a lifetime. And you have no idea which opportunity is the opportunity of a lifetime. It may not be this job. It could be the next one. If you make a positive impression in an interview and you may not land that job, that interviewer could have really loved how you interviewed, and that person may not be at that company for forever, or they might be, and they might come up with a new job. They might reach out to you personally to have you come and interview. It's all about the relationship. It's all about how they perceive you. It's all about that impression you leave. Your state is critical. Now, what is the story you tell yourself for why you are going to be successful? This is something we kind of did earlier when I asked you, how do you want other people to feel about you in the interview? This is a great exercise to prepare yourself for a professional interview. If you are intentional about how you want other people to feel about you, you are going to put yourself into a position to succeed, because then you're much more likely to manifest that outcome. Literally, law of attraction, putting it out there. I want other people to feel XYZ about me. Confident, smart, intelligent, well prepared. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's a weakness that you have, but you like to have them perceive it as a strength. Maybe it's a strength that you have that you'd really like to amplify even as a greater strength. Doesn't matter, but set an intention of something. Because if you don't set an intention of something, it could be wild in terms of what they actually perceive of you. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you're going to do to make the most out of this interview? Are you going to come prepared with questions? Are you going to come prepared with doing background research on the company? Are you going to make an intentional, focused effort on taking notes during the conversation, so then you're asking poignant, direct questions to the interviewer that are relevant about his or her life? Are you going to do the things that you need to do to be the most successful in an interview, or are you not? So the strategies you're going to learn from our guest speaker later on in this workshop, I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest speaker has to say. But before we jump into our guest speaker, I want to talk about one final thing, and that is getting yourself into a routine that can help you prepare for an interview. One of the things that I like to do, have an accountability partner. This could be it could be anybody. But what you want to do with your accountability is you want to share with your accountability partner 3 things that you learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to get closer to that internship or job. What this does, and you might think this sounds silly, you might think this sounds crazy, it could be another student in the program, it could be a friend of yours, does not matter. But what we've learned, what we've observed is that students who land jobs and internships through this program are substantially more likely to actually land that job and internship if they told other people about their experience. One of the questions we ask at the end of the question is, on average, how many other people did you tell about your experience in the program? What we ended up learning was that when a student told 20 or more people about their experience in Ambition in Motion, their likelihood of also landing their job and internship was substantially higher than students who didn't. There's a direct correlation to you telling more people about your experience and what you're learning in this program to actually landing the outcomes you like than not. So I want to challenge you to identify an accountability partner. Share with them 3 things that you've learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to help you get closer to landing that job or internship. Now, the other big thing that I want to bring up with you is our referral program. So we are now starting to open up the applications. And 1, I'd love for you to be in part of the program again. You can get a new mentor, you're going to get new content, you're going to learn from new speakers. But more importantly, I want you to encourage other students to get involved as well. We have a referral program for you, so then you are discounted to get in the program next semester. Essentially, anytime that anybody applies, we ask them, how'd you hear about us? If they write in your name, you get credit. If you don't mind being an ambassador for this program, I'm helping encourage other students to get involved and take advantage of this. I would greatly appreciate it because it would help us make a bigger impact on more people, which is really what our goal is. So let's jump into our workshop. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. I'm so excited to transition into this next part of the workshop. Remember to answer the 3 questions that we asked during the workshop. That's how you get credit for being here within 24 hours of the workshop going live. If you got any questions, any concerns, any issues with anything at all, please email support@envision-in-motion.com. We will answer those questions, concerns, and issues. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. Hey everybody, welcome to our workshop this evening. I am so excited to get started to talk about how to prepare for the interview. Interviewing is a really interesting thing just in general. Add on COVID and you're doing things virtually, you're trying to prepare for all these crazy things going on in the world, and it throws in a lot of complexities. We've got an incredible guest with us here this evening to talk about how we can best prepare for the interview. Let's put our foot forward. We've got here Tina Nash. Tina is the Chief People Officer for a company called OneBridge. Essentially, OneBridge is a BI, data analytics, and enterprise application development consulting firm. She has hired many people in all functions and has extensive knowledge into how to best prepare for the interview. Tina, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Garrett. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. In my mind, I'm seeing you.
Perfect. So Tina, let's start. I'd love, maybe before we jump into just preparing for the interview, I know I gave a brief background on you, but would you be open to sharing with us a little bit of your background and some of the careers and the jobs that you pursued through your own career, just so that we can learn about your own progression and perhaps some of the ways that you prepared for the interview for yourself for multiple roles?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for asking. So I've been in IT consulting for about 15 years now, but prior to that, I was in recruitment. I've always been interested in recruitment, human resources. A couple years before that, and right out of college, I actually joined AmeriCorps for a year and kind of got a start there, with just exploring, what I wanted to do, helping the community. Thought it was a really great way to learn a little bit more about myself and what I wanted to do. So I've been in the IT space, on the business side, on the HR side, on the executive side, and strategy, all combined for about 15 years. But did take sort of putting myself in your shoes, speaking to the audience, and kind of remembering, getting ready to graduate from college and trying to figure out, what I wanted to do, preparing for interviews, ultimately deciding to, join AmeriCorps to kind of kickstart my own career, but excited to have some different perspective, hopefully to share with you as you're getting ready to start your own.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's really cool. I didn't know that you were in AmeriCorps. That's awesome. And I think for a lot of people, that's an option that, a lot of people consider and a lot of people pursue, and they don't a lot of times even really know what the next step is after AmeriCorps. I guess out of my own curiosity, did you know what you wanted to do after AmeriCorps, or before joining AmeriCorps, did you know what you wanted to do after AmeriCorps?
I didn't, and that was part of the reason. So I was a liberal arts major, so didn't have the benefit of, sounds like you have a lot of business and engineering majors in your audience. I didn't have the benefit of having a real structured major, and I always wanted to, I always, was active volunteering. Like now I manage all of our giving strategy and our D&I strategy, and kind of have carried that passion for the community with me all these years. But really wanted to use the experience not only to give back, but just you get such a strong variety of opportunities within the program. Like I felt like within that year, I, got to lead so many I started a newspaper that went on for years after I left in the Fountain Square area. I, got to lead a team of community development corporations. Really got to do some leadership work in school. Like, I also, it was a benefit for me to just sort of explore lots of different, lots of different sort of projects and oversight that I definitely wouldn't have had if I would have gone, if I would have gone on to be like an intern at Target or something, on the business side. So I was really grateful to have that opportunity. I just encourage people now managing the OR Fellowship for OneBridge, which I don't, some of you have probably heard of. Those students really get an insanely in-depth, experience in their first 2 years out of college that just going with a traditional job you would never get. So I sound like I'm plugging these alternative solutions, but they're great options if you don't know exactly what you want to do.
I think those are awesome. And I mean, let's be honest here. What 22, 23-year-old really, who knows at any point in time in their life, like what is the exact dream career that we're going to be pursuing, especially as a young person? It's not blatantly obvious to us. I mean, we learn things in theory in school and it gives us an idea of kind of what we might want to do, but it's not, we don't really get to fully consume it until we're actually in it. And so I love that perspective. I love that you are opening up doors and opportunities, because I think some students think, well, if I take this alternative path, like where will I be? You're the chief people officer for your company. That's a really like an amazing place to be for your company. That's a high like accomplishment. I think a lot of students might think like, oh, I would aspire to be the chief something within my company, chief people officer, chief executive officer, chief operations officer, and they may not know how to get there, and they think they have to go through this cookie cutter methodology. But I think what you're showing is that there's so many cool opportunities to take advantage of that they may not have considered before.
Yeah, I would say 90% of the time, I speak to a lot of executives, and 90% of the time there's a very windy, curvy path to get there, and it's never what you think it's going to be, and it's never what you think you want to do. It's just, starting somewhere. And I'll share later. I thought about some of the questions you asked, but just, I'd encourage people not to necessarily go for the highest dollar offer. Go for the experience. Go for the opportunity. You're young. You have lots of ability to make money in your future, but start with something that's gonna propel you like this, instead of like, get into this sort of path that you think you should be on, and often you just really go like this. So getting the experience, like really putting yourself first, thinking about your long term, and being really open to where, your first experience or job will lead you is going to serve you much better in the long term, based on all the, wisdom that I've gleaned from fellow executives over the years.
That's really cool. And I love that component of just like, take the thing that's going to allow you to grow as much as you can. And I think in theory, it sounds great, but sometimes in practice, it can be difficult for students to make that decision. The thing that makes me think of is the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. She talks about this story of how before she was at Facebook, she was at Google. And before she was at Google, she had moved to San Francisco for a year. She'd been an assistant within multiple political offices. And when she moved to San Francisco, she really struggled to get her foot in the door. And it had taken her like a year to finally get an offer. And so finally, after a year of being in San Francisco, she got 3 offers. And one was from Google, and 2 others were from some legal offices and stuff like that. The one from Google was financially way below the one from the legal offices. And she was Sheryl Sandberg's very organized. She had a very detailed spreadsheet of like, what were the perks of each one? And for Google, obviously there was growth, but for the rest of them, it wasn't nearly as extensive. And so she went to Eric Schmidt, and Eric Schmidt was the original CEO of Google at the time. And she went to him. She was like, hey, I'm just kind of laid out the offers I've got right now. Here's the spreadsheets. I'm really struggling to figure out what this decision is. And he had said something that will always stick in my mind. He said, if somebody offers you a seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask which seat, you just get on. Story just stuck with me so much. So anyways, I think if you're a student, you're thinking to yourself like, where do I go? Where do I want to be? Rocket ship. If it's going to be the thing that elevates you to a next level, you can make money anywhere doing anything.
Yep.
But the thing that allows you to grow the most extensively can be so massive.
Yeah, I would encourage, your students to look at, to read Lean In as well. I think that's a great recommendation. And I'll just echo that. I just shared with my company right before the holidays that, I took this job with OneBridge from a competitor. I had a very cush job sitting on the executive team there. I was, I managed a lot of people, but it was like really easy. I had lots of layers under me, like I'd already built. I'd spent 8 years building. I told myself I'd never go to another IT firm, that I wanted to switch industries. Fast forward to, really following my gut, starting talking with Smart IT, which is now OneBridge. And, I took the job initially 8 years ago for less money, less responsibility, and far more work. And it's led to this beautiful career highlight where I have been now for the past year. And if I wouldn't have just listened to my gut, if I would have stayed with what I thought I was supposed to do, never ever would have taken the job. Who would take a job? I just had twins. They were 3 months old when I made the decision to leave. Who takes a job 3 to 4 months after they have twins for less money, more work, and less responsibility? But really listening to my gut. And I told myself that I would be somewhere, I would be much happier if I took this and really waited out. And so glad I did. Never looked back. So me and Cheryl, she's a pretty big deal, but on a miniature scale, Cheryl and I are simpatico there.
I love that. I'm glad that you found the alignment in those stories. So let's talk about preparing for the interview.
Yeah.
Before we even get the offer, before we can even make the decisions about what the best career path to pursue is, we have to get the offer first.
Mm-hmm.
How can students best prepare for an interview? How can they start putting themselves in the best position to succeed when they're in the interview?
Yeah, I think this is such a critical time. Again, as I interview a lot of recent grads, and just you can tell who comes prepared and who doesn't. So, the things that just make me cringe are when students don't understand, they haven't done their homework on the company. So, what do you know about the company that you're getting ready to interview with? What are maybe some fun facts, some little known facts, versus just being able to regurgitate the first couple of pages of the website. Any recent news. So really staying up with not just the website, but social media, which I know, students these days are so plugged in with. But, what are some recent, do they have any recent acquisitions, any interesting hires, any little tidbits that maybe go beyond the website, I think is a great way to just show that you are, looking at the company holistically, not just the website, but, the team and, any wins that they've had that the person who's interviewing you, might be really proud of and be excited to know that you know about it. Bring it up really naturally in the conversation, just to show that you're really connected to the organization. Bring up its mission and values if it's clear that the organization is really proud of its mission and values. I love when we are so proud of our culture and of our values and how we live them every day. And there's lots of if you look, there's lots of kind of available information out there to learn about us. So I absolutely love it when people bring up, something about, our community giving initiative, or some of our values videos that we have out there, something about our one team culture. So
I love that you brought up research. I think there's an interesting point, and I love to dive deeper into that, because I think there's a fine balance between perhaps not necessarily being a regurgitator of hey, I did all this research, fact, trying to more or less kind of be a brown noser. But I think that there is a benefit to I think there is a amount of tact, amount of etiquette we can have when showing we've done the research, but doing it in a classy way. Do you have any suggestions on how students can go about just essentially bringing up that they've done the research, but not doing it robotically, but doing it in a more natural way?
I do. Yeah. That was it's really important for me to thank you for prompting that, just to make sure that people know to just work it into the conversation. So you don't want to just, you don't want to just spew it all out in the beginning. Like, be really thoughtful. If you've got a few things that you really want to get across about yourself, weave it into your answers. So if someone asks you a question about yourself, hey, funny you should mention that, because something that's really important to me is, I'm an avid cyclist, and I saw on your website that you created an event called an awareness event called Bike to Be Heard. That is definitely something that I would be, interested in participating in. Like, I love that your company does things like that, because I'm an avid cyclist. Like, things that are just more, relate them more to you, that they're more conversational. And also say, the interviewer is really key when it comes to research. So you don't want to spit out the interviewer's resume, but you do want to find something in common, find a way to connect with them as a person, like, especially during COVID, especially if you're doing these interviews on a remote basis. Find some people want to get personal right now. Like, there's a lot of just fatigue on the video, and there's a lot of isolation, and just if you're reaching out and taking the extra step to show that you're connecting with the person you're interviewing with, that is going to win them over hand over fist, especially right now during these times when a lot of people are home. And kind of like when tragedy happens, people tend to get a little bit self-involved. So they might be like wanting to hear about themselves or talk about themselves a little bit more than normal. It just might be a really nice touch to show that you care and you research them. So that's another way to kind of make it natural, is to make it more about the person than, I did all this reading.
I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And the other way I've seen students do a really good job of blending in and weaving into research is at the end when it comes to asking questions. Sometimes I'll see the questions asked of, well, do you have any questions for us? And the students will ask something along the lines of, well, I noticed based on some recent news that this is XYZ thing is happening with the company. I mean, based on my role, I would assume, or based on this role, I would assume that perhaps this part of the role could have been impacted from this new development that has happened. I guess I'd be curious, what are your thoughts on the ways that this position could have been implemented by or impacted by this new bit of news that has happened? Research and ask the question.
I think that's a great thought. Just, at the end, blending it in with current events, blending it in with the news, that's all great. Like, really linking it, research on the job description's an easy one too, because that's gonna come out really naturally throughout the course of the conversation. If you really demonstrate a very solid knowledge of, what the job entails and maybe who the team members are, you could also ask questions at the end around some, maybe like a little more nuanced question, not something that can just be like regurgitated. Well, if you read the job description, you would know the answer to this, but something a little bit more nuanced, just to demonstrate that you took that you really you read the job description, but you also processed how it might feel for you to work in the job, what your strengths might be, and then you're able to turn a connection into a question potentially. So
yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I'd love to take a moment to pause and ask the students a question really quick. The question is this: what is your plan of attack for weaving in the fact that you've done research in your upcoming interviews? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about it. Really, what is your plan for weaving in the fact that you've done research that's not robotic, but at the same time shows that you've done the research? So post in the comment section. I love to learn about it. I love to learn about what other people are doing or what they found to be successful as well. I think it's a great community learning opportunity there. So Tina, I love to transition into another part of preparing for the interview, because every student in our program has a mentor through this program. How can students best leverage their mentor to prepare for the interview?
I think in a lot of ways, of the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to utilizing your mentor is more like your mentor is someone who in theory who knows you and who understands your strengths and weaknesses. So first, use them to really reflect that back to you, and to gain some additional like self-awareness through how others perceive you. So make sure that you like clearly understand, how your mentor how your mentor might perceive you. Make sure that they clearly understand that you clearly understand what what your strengths and weaknesses are in the eyes of your mentor, so that you can utilize those to your advantage when you go into the conversation. So that's the first thing I'd probably check in with the mentor on. So just more of just more of that kind of self-awareness bit. And then I would leverage your mentor carefully when it comes to networking. So anyone that you are asking a favor for in your situation with not very much work experience, you're maybe asking them to connect you with an executive, do all of the things that we've already talked about. Come extremely well prepared for the conversation. Absolutely nail all of the easy stuff. Be on time, be well dressed, be be gracious, be humble, all of those things. Don't waste the moment if someone gives you an introduction. Be overly prepared. Do your research on that person. Don't just really do your mentor proud. That's probably like, as I've spent 20 years essentially like building a career via networking, like you don't, and I've made some mistakes. I've burned some bridges over that time. And, starting out, I wish I would have known some of the things I know now around just how to so carefully cultivate your network. And anytime you get an introduction, it's like gold, like you handle it like it's something so precious, and just don't mess it up with any like the easy things that you can, that you have lots of control over. You don't have control over, is it going to be a perfect interview? Is it going, am I going to, say everything just right? You can't really control that. You can prepare as best you can. You can get the easy stuff right. Follow back up with the person who referred you. Let them know how it went. Ask them to follow up, however it's appropriate based on how the conversation went, based on how, they left it. But just start networking early and often, and be very, your folks who are helping you network at your age are very precious. So treat them as such.
I think that's a really good point. And I think, kind of as you've alluded to, there are some lessons that some people just have to learn from falling flat on their face.
Mm-hmm.
It happens. It's not the end of the world. But let this be a lesson when it comes to meeting with people in your mentor's network. Really treat them as precious. Treat them as great opportunities. Treat it as gold, because it can be a massive door opener for you to wherever you like to go. So yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. And I think I'm glad that you brought up both sides of it, where, one, treat it as gold, but two, sharing that you've also made mistakes. Some bridges have been burnt, and it's okay. It's not the end of the world. I think students can really, if they do something wrong, it builds up a lot of anxiety and stress, and it's okay. It's not the end of the world, but it's something to learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's that, I don't want to instill any fear, to just get out there and like get something started, but just really, because it's so important, early, network often. And you're going to, I still, you just, like, I made it past all my early mistakes, and I'm still making them today, but the more you do it, the less it matters, because you have one great connection builds on another, builds on another, builds on another.
So true. So let's talk about resumes and cover letters. This is such a critical part of the interview. It is something that everybody stresses, but sometimes it's difficult to fully comprehend it. What is the point of a resume and a cover letter?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's so hard for college students who may not have the experience. Like, it's a no-brainer for some of us who are, a little longer in the tooth, who have more experience, to just like put a resume together. Like, it all flows well. It all, looks good. All my past kind of bouncing around, like, don't even need to think about that anymore. But at the ages of your sophomore, junior in college, it's extremely important to, I'll go back to the self-awareness piece, like figure out who you are, what kind of environment you'll fit really well in, what do you want, infuse as much of your as much of you in the resume as possible. You're not going to don't pretend to be something you're not. You clearly can look at a resume of someone in college and know that you don't have 20 years of experience, but you can talk about how do you work well in groups? How do you solve problems? Like, what kind of challenges are you up for? Any like awards and recognition are always great to put on there, even if it seems really small. I just interviewed someone a couple of weeks ago who was a manager at a Hotbox Pizza, and like I noticed it on his resume. It had nothing to do with anything that I was like looking at him for, but I remember, like, I was in college and I was a manager at a pizza place called Eduardo. It was right up here at 82nd and Dean Road, and like it just really struck a chord with me. So we ended up talking about his experience as a manager. I got a really good feel for, him as a manager of this pizza place, and like could kind of extrapolate what it would be like to work with him in a more professional environment based on that. So don't hesitate to put things on your resume either. Like, it is what it is. You don't have 20 years of experience. Put that Hotbox job on there. You never know who it's going to touch, and don't worry too much about the words. Just worry about really like getting that foot in the door, expressing yourself. I love, and I really strongly encourage anyone to get your hands on any kind of self-assessment tool, such as StrengthsFinder or the Myers-Briggs or the Predictive Index. There's a million of them out there. You don't have the experience, but you can demonstrate that, like, hey, I care about how I might fit into a work culture, or how I might solve problems. Here's some data to back it. Don't be afraid to tag those right on to the resume. Lots of employers are using those types of tools within their own hiring process. They may even use the same one that you might attach. So that's a great way to sort of beef up your resume at your age. So, I'm happy to help with that or talk through that offline. But I think that just showing your own personal, showing in a cover letter, showing the knowledge of the company, showing knowledge of yourself and how you might see yourself in that role, really bringing that to life. And then the resume, just don't be afraid to put, just to be super honest and out there. I guess I'll start there and see if you want to go in any kind of direction.
Yeah, I love that. I do want to go in a direction. I also want to take a moment to ask the students a question real quick, because you brought up personality assessments. I think it's really relevant, and I think a lot of students have taken them. So I'd love to ask students, if you've taken a personality assessment, whether that be DISC or Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder or Predictive Index or Culture Index or any of the personality assessments, what is your personality? Post in the comment section. If you've not taken one of these personality assessments before, what is a personality assessment you would like to take eventually sometime soon, or that you think you might have access to, perhaps even through your university? Post it in the comment section. I'd love to learn more about that. But Tina, you brought up a point of Hotbox Pizza. Might not necessarily be relevant to the role, but it struck a chord with you. I guess the contrary opposite side of that is something I've sometimes seen with students is they will use no margin borders, 8-point font. They will put everything on that one-page resume just to try to get it onto one page because they don't know what to do. How do we know what is most relevant, what is most important to keep versus get rid of on the resume?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Now, this particular person didn't have a lot on there, so I don't think anybody, to your point, wants to read a resume with a ton of words with someone without very much experience. It's hard to wade through that anyway. Focus on the things that are really relevant. To take the time to cater it. So if you're applying for jobs in manufacturing and also retail, you're probably going to have different types of jobs that you would want to highlight in one of those versus the other. Take the time to do that. This one size fits all idea of a resume and cover letter, it won't work with just a little bit of experience. So really do take the time to make it, whether it's industry specific, or if you're trying to decide between a bunch of jobs, really look into the skills match, like the skills match between the job and the job you're going for and the job you've had, and just really try to get some alignment there. But I'm totally with you. I don't even want to read a long resume for someone who's been working for 40 years. So so make sure that it's really interesting, personal, and relevant to your target.
That makes a ton of sense. Thanks for clarifying that. Now we're in the interview itself. Let's say our resume has gotten us into the interview and we're there and it's going great. Everything's going great. We get to the very end. The interviewer asks us, do you have any questions for us?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any suggested questions that students can ask during the interview? And really, I guess maybe a follow-on to that is responding with, I don't have any questions. Is that an appropriate response for that sort of scenario? I'd love to learn your thoughts.
It's not. I've never hired anyone who hasn't had a question, and it's not a coincidence. So it just shows, it really causes you to think about, okay, what this person's in this role, what else are they going to come unprepared for? Like, are they not interested in what I have to offer? Are they, they didn't take the time, they don't know how to manage their schedule. They didn't take the time to think about any questions, or they're afraid to ask questions, which, especially at OneBridge, we've got to take a lot of initiative and got to figure out how to ask questions and get things done because, we're in pretty fast-paced growth mode sort of. And all the, actually, I've been in tech for so long, everywhere in tech is like that. So my favorite question is, it just goes back again, and I love that you asked me that in the beginning. And I even have it in my notes, even though you asked me, is, what is your path? You seem like you have a really interesting, they can flatter the person they're interviewing. You seem like you have a really interesting, job, and a really interesting background. Can you tell me a little bit? I'm a blank slate here. I'd love to, I'm obviously my career path is the top of my mind. I'd love to hear how you got, to where you are and what kind of twists and turns maybe, that you took that, I could learn from. I always think make a question really personal to the interviewer. They might have interview fatigue at the end, depending on how many people they've interviewed that day, depending on how many different people they've, had to sit up straight for and, listen to all day or be really on. So just a little break for someone to tell you they're really interested in you and your path, I think always goes a long way. So the other thing that I think is really important during this time is to be really humble, and to not, I guess maybe humble is not the right word, not to ask outright, about pay or any me-isms at the end. So sometimes that's okay if it comes up in the conversation. I wouldn't just categorically rule it out, but just making sure that you have questions that are not easily answerable based on the job description that you read. Something that's, something that really demonstrates the fact that you have put yourself in this job, in this company, that you want to, you're expressing interest, you're asking questions that let the interviewer know that, hey, I want this. And, just in case we weren't clear, this is, this is how I see myself, and then following that up with a question. So kind of using that opportunity to sell yourself a little bit, but definitely don't go with a lazy question of hey, we already covered this 10 times earlier in the conversation. Something really interesting about something a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, and I think that maybe is where we can talk about, where we can weave back in the whole research question of just, if you've done some research, you can weave that into your questions at the very end. But I really want to harp in on the point that you brought up about asking about the interviewer themselves. Mm-hmm. This is just straight out of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. People love to talk about themselves. At the end of the day, as an interviewer, you are acting on behalf of your company. And don't get me wrong, you love your company. It's easy to sell your company, all that other fun stuff. But it's so easy to talk about yourself. When someone asks me about me, it's easy. It just flows. It's mm-hmm. so easy to talk about myself because, it's me. No one else has lived my life. It's easy to talk about oneself in the interview. And so if you, as the candidate, show genuine interest in the interviewer, they're going to show positive bias towards you. It's just going to happen just because you cared. You cared about learning more about them, not about the role or the company, which I know sounds silly, but people love to talk about themselves.
Yeah,
so I think that's such a good point that you brought up, Tina.
And especially like at the end, because it's like, you put yourself, empathize with the interviewer, just especially if it's like the end of the day, they may have been interviewing, you may be their 8th hour of interviews. Like they've been talking about somebody else all day. It's human nature to want to talk about, ourselves, to feel like a little bit, feel flattered. Like we all want to feel like, oh, we all want to feel like, yes, I'm really interested in like you and your job and your company. Like, I don't know, that's just like it's a really nice way to end it.
Totally. Yeah, and perhaps even just like the simplest way is just, could you share with me your story about how you got to where you're at today and the work that you're doing? Everybody loves to share their story.
Yeah.
But you brought up another really good point, and that was etiquette. And etiquette, I think, for students expounds in a very unique way that's not necessarily normal to really anybody else in the professional world. And that's the fact that many students will get offers in October, in November, in December, in January, February, or March before their graduation in May. And so what ends up happening is oftentimes a student will get an offer, and then they'll be waiting to hear back from 2 or 3 other companies. And the company that offers them the offer, they say, hey, could you get back to us within the next week or two to let us know if you accept? How do we handle if we have multiple offers, or how do we handle if we're waiting to hear back from offers? Do you have any suggestions on just etiquette for handling these types of scenarios and situations?
I do, and I'll share a little anecdote if you don't mind. I was interviewing some December grads, some June grads back in October, and they were extremely highly sought after skill sets, and lots of my competitors were competing for them. Because of the program I was interviewing for, we had a salary cap, so we knew that we were going to have to sell really hard on, OneBridge and what we had to pay based on the external program, in order to like have a crack at these folks. And because they were going to get offers for probably 20, 30, sometimes 40% more. So interviewed two of the gentlemen that I interviewed kind of had totally different ways of coming at me with competing offers. So the first one, who far and away, head and shoulders, his skill set and what he has done in college is like close to more than I've done in my 41 years. Like he was just a phenomenal candidate from a technical perspective, like our number one top choice. We knew it was going to be extremely challenging to get him with other restrictions. So I called, I made him the offer on a Friday evening, and Tuesday at noon, I hadn't heard anything back, like no acknowledgement, like nothing was happening. I had to call him. I had to call the program and let them know I hadn't heard from him. Like, he called back to say, gosh, he was, wanting to call me back, but he was still in an interview process with 3 other companies, and he didn't want to call me back until he knew. And I was completely discouraged by that. And, he no longer, long story short, he went from my top candidate to not. And then another candidate who was sort of like mid-pack, I made an offer to the same day, and he called me he asked if we could speak that evening. He said, he could make himself available on the weekend. He had some extenuating circumstances that he'd love to get my feedback on. We talked all the way through all of his other interviews. He laid himself basically, was very open and just said, this is an awkward situation. I love OneBridge, everything I've heard. However, I'm graduating in June. It's only October. I don't know how I could possibly make this decision. Could you help me walk through this thought process? So we spent an hour on the phone. It's a delightful hour, came up with a really great compromise. He didn't have any kind of ask until the end. He just wanted to kind of talk through everything. We came to a really good compromise I gave him 3 weeks to, make a decision. And it went so much better they both were in the same situation where they had lots of competing offers, but the second gentleman ended up just winning favor. We're staying in touch. We're going to be like, I would not be surprised if we ended up hiring him, down the road. So just a little anecdote there, but I do think that making sure that you, if you have a second interview in a week, letting that first company know the situation, letting them know that you will press the second company, potentially ask for an earlier interview, show grace if they can't work with your timeline, and then make your best decision from there. So don't string anyone along. You got there's a lot of potential opportunities in the future. Where you go for your first job is over 90% not going to be where you end up for the rest of your life. So just be really open and honest and timely with what you have going on, and the companies will appreciate you for that.
I think that was awesome. That was advice I don't know if we've heard from any of our speakers before. I thought that was some of the most poignant bits of information that I've heard on how to act in that sort of scenario. Students, if you're watching this, if you're going through that scenario, rewind by about 1.5 minutes, rewatch what Tina just said. I thought that was insanely valuable. Essentially, what you're leveraging is the IKEA effect. The IKEA effect states that when you are helpful in building anything, you are much more likely to want to see that thing succeed. So if you're building your furniture from IKEA, you're much more likely to feel an emotional attachment to that desk that you just built. Well, this absolutely works for interviews and candidates. And what you just described was so powerful. Here's a student who said, as opposed to ghosting you essentially and kind of leaving you in the dark of not knowing what the heck to go on, came to you and said, hey, could you help me walk through the scenario? Just kind of like the Sheryl Sandberg situation with Google. And you helped walk him through the scenario. And even though based on the story, it sounds like he may not have accepted your offer, but he's kept a really positive impression in your mind. And like you said, you very well may end up hiring him sometime down the line because of how such a strong impression he left with you. So I think if you are a student, you are thinking about how do I handle multiple offers? That is the classiest way to handle that. And you involve them, you allow them to be a partner in your decision-making process, and they're not offended either way, depending on how you decide. So
it was the most mature approach of anyone. There's no way I would have been that thoughtful at that age, and the way we were talking through things, and he wasn't asking me for anything. I mean, it was a must do. Like, we were texting a couple of weeks ago, like, he definitely has I will mentor him in whatever capacity he wants, like, until we hire him, whenever that is. So, like, yes.
I love that. So last part of this, I'd love just to talk about, we talked a little bit about it before, but I want to just kind of retouch base on it. How do we determine what is the most important component to an offer and to pursuing a certain role?
Yeah, I might have a little bit of an off-the-reservation answer, especially for those. I know how business school students think and how engineering and IT students sometimes think. So I absolutely would think the most important thing at your age, at your juncture, is experience. So really drill down, find out from those interviewers, what are you going to get to do in your role? What are you going to get to do that maybe your peers aren't going to get to do in their roles that they might take $5,000 more for? Seems like a lot of money right now, but it's not. So your salary, you want your worth to exponentially grow. In order to do that, you have to build that foundation of experience, like, as quickly as possible. It's not about the money. It's not about, you're not going to build that by taking just the first, the best financial offer. You're going to build that by building experience, by building expertise, by having experiences that people your age, don't have. Companies are getting super creative with how they're hiring. Like, companies anymore are not looking at your years of experience to determine, like, what your worth is. They're looking at the substance of the work that you've done. So absolutely, I would say go with the people that inspire you. Really pay lots of attention to the team dynamic that's going on, the people that inspire you to, the type of work that you'll be doing, way over the salary or anything else. Obviously, those things are important. Everybody has different personal situations, salary, benefits, time off, all that stuff is important, and I'm sure your students are all smart and they can figure out how to, put spreadsheets together, apples to apples. But as someone who, I've had a couple things I've regretted taking for the money, and I look at, how much maybe quicker I could have ramped up to what I'm doing now if I would have gone with experience, or a great opportunity for a great mentor, or some of those intangibles. Those pay off in dividends later.
Yeah, I love that advice you give. I actually have a story on that. But before I jump into that story, I'd love to ask the students, what is the most important component to you to a job offer? Post in the comment section. I love to learn about it. I think that the message of choosing the opportunity that's going to allow you to grow the most and get the most experience is so critical. A story that I can think of is from a former intern of Ambition and Motion. He is a software developer, really smart, bright student, really top of his class, and he has a really inspiring story. I mean, he grew up in a scenario where he was not financially well off at all. He really relied on a scholarship that it gave him a full ride essentially for school to pursue an education in computer science. So super smart guy, but from a family and socioeconomic upbringing component, like did not really have any money. And so when he was an intern with us at Ambition and Motion, it was a senior year, he was graduating, he had multiple offers for his services for full-time work after college, and unfortunately for him, financial was the far and away the most important thing. And he asked me for a little bit of advice just walking through it, and I was like, well, the one that is offering you to pay you the most, it doesn't appear like this is an industry that is going to be growing and having a lot of expansion in the future. And you've got a couple offers for some companies that really seem to be on the cutting edge, and you might be losing $5,000 a year for taking a lesser offer, but it certainly seems like they are on a much faster growth trajectory. And unfortunately for him, as the economic downturn kind of hit, his company, it started really declining. He ended up getting laid off. And so now he's kind of in this next search for the next role. But unfortunately, he spent the last couple of years working in an industry and working at a company where his skills weren't necessarily top of the line. And so now he's in a more difficult position, and it really stinks. But it really goes to show that there's so much power in choosing growth and opportunity for skill over just like that $5,000 pales in comparison to, perhaps where he could have been had he chosen a more growth-oriented company or opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that story happen. Thank you for sharing that. I've seen that story happen so many times. Just, then their skill sets are stale, or they're just, people are just really, stuck. And again, you sometimes have to make those, but getting into like a cutting edge, industry where you're challenged, where, where you could get almost the equivalent of an entire like master's degree worth of experience in your first year out of getting your bachelor's. Like, think about things in those terms. Like, those things translate to financially, like into, that you can actually associate experience with dollars if you think about things like, what are you doing instead of, going to school right now, and like how fast could these skills propel you, in the future.
That's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tina, this was awesome. This was a great workshop. I feel like you shared some really amazing wisdom with our students. Final thing, I know a lot of our students are on LinkedIn. Is that all right if students reach out to you and connect with you on LinkedIn? Is there any other way that you recommend our students connect and reach out to you for just any further guidance or any further insights?
Absolutely. I would love for them to message me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. Just let me know where where we met, and very happy to, again, I'm relationship builder. Like, I would love to, help out however, I can. You never know where, where these things might lead. I also have, my team has prepared an interview guide that, feel free to share with the group. I can email that to you. It also has our director of talent acquisition, her contact information on there. Her name's Allison Williams. And I'll send that to you now, and you can share it with your group however you see fit.
Love it. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think for the students, yeah, reach out to us and Megan at support@ambitioninmotion.com. She'll get you that information, and or just reach out to Tina on LinkedIn and keep practicing your LinkedIn skills. But Tina, this was awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Students, thank you all for being here this evening. Have a wonderful rest of your night. I look forward to seeing you at our next workshop. See you, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Garrett. Thanks, everyone.